Yeah, what's Pappy up to? Been gone for a bit, sorry. This is something I worked on a bit back. It's a 2.4 liter GM, rear main seal leak. And I call it the engineering wonder of the world. And you'll see it's all over the internet. Been a problem for a while. Makes you wonder, what were the engineers thinking? Here we go. All right, so here's a video that's sent to me on this rear main seal leak. And it'll start just with a little drip, and then, but it doesn't take long. It starts streaming out of there. And what's crazy about this, and it's, like I said, all over the internet, been a long time problem, the PCV, positive crankcase ventilation, little tiny hole in it, I'll show you that it clogs up and causes this rear main seal to blow out. We'll get into it later in the video, and I'll actually show you that little hole and how to clean that out, because you got to really do both. You can change your rear main seal. It'll last for a little while maybe, but not forever. So it's a bunch of parts and pieces. We'll get into it and see what happens. Yep, so there it is, just on the rack. In that little 5 minutes, you get a little puddle of oil just getting it positioned onto the rack, but the whole bottom is just soaked with oil. So definitely this thing was leaking. That's not barf. It's actually an oil-water mixture that was in the inlet system that accumulates because of this. There's the little few pointers here. There's the exhaust manifold on the top side. 3 studs. This is the whole after the battery box, and a lot of other things are out of the way so you can get to the transmission in that upper link. And there's the actual transmission connector. There it is. There's a battery box support. There's the upper transmission engine mount, I should say, that you got to get out of there. So there's a lot of parts and pieces. I'm not going to get into those details, but I just wanted you to see it all. There it is. There's kind of another look at it. There's that cover over the exhaust manifold on top you got to get off, and then that bracket. This little stud mount here is part of the exhaust hanging system. I'll show you that in a second, and it's got to be dealt with if you have the transfer case like this on an all-wheel drive, which kind of makes this a little more complicated. I'll get back to that, I think, later, because I'm going to show you this just dropping the subframe. That's really what you got to do to get the transmission out on this. And there's some things I do a little different than others. And we'll get the subframe out, and I'll show you that. I actually don't take ball joints loose. I take the lower control arms loose instead. Some of the other things I do is I leave the rack and pinion in. I'll show you that in a bit. And I just makes it a lot cleaner when you pull out the subframe, which, check this out. Nice little handy, turns out, if you got one of these trash bins around. Works out good for hanging your subframes on. So there's a perfect tool. So there's the rear main seal. Like I said, it leaks. There's what it looked like when I got it pulled out. I don't know if I actually tore that, but I do know the rear main seal was leaking. Once you get the new one in, looks like this. Looks fine when it's actually, when you first look at them, by the way. And here's what I was talking about, leaving the rack and pinion in. Actually leave it in, and then I use a little strap to hold it up and hang it on the actual exhaust manifold there. And then a little bungee to keep it pulled back away from the transmission. I'm actually going back in with the transmission here, but it gives you that clearance, and then you can just slide the transmission down and out. I find it much easier than dealing with that bolt there, which connects it to the steering, so you don't have to worry about the clock spring or any of that. It just avoids that. And the other thing I was talking about is this is where I removed the lower control arm from right there. And I mean, it makes it pretty simple. This is already after I got the transfer case back in, and there's a drive shaft off the side, exhaust. The exhaust is what I was talking about, that bracket earlier. There it is. This bracket probably took quite a bit of time and is one of the biggest nuisance. It sits right up here on that same stud I was showing you earlier, and that stud, it would be fine if it was just right there, but the catalytic converter comes down right in front of it, and you got to have that out of the way to get the catalytic converter out. So it's very tricky to reach to the nut on the top front side. I'm going to show you one more time. There it is sitting on that stud, and it's that upper little stud up there right up on top. And like I said, you don't have access, so here's how I get it. A couple extensions, 3 of them I think total, and then a universal with a socket. I can't remember the size, sorry, I want to say 13 millimeter. But you can see I go over, you got to remember the transfer case is in position when you're trying to do this, and you got to go over the top of the transfer case to get to it. And you can see that where the exhaust sits right there. Here is the culprit of the whole dumb design, and you got to take the intake off, which is not that hard, really. There's some videos out there, so I'm not going to get into that. One thing I do is take the throttle body off. It gives you that clearance to be able to slide it up out of there. There it is, that tiny little hole right there. It gets clogged up, so you got to clean that out. Spray it with some carb cleaner or whatever you got, brake cleaner, to get it all cleaned out and make sure it's passing through clearly, and then you can put it all back together. And you got to do that, otherwise that rear main seal will leak again. That's fun. There it is, man. Good luck.